Battlefield citizens are upset that the Board of Aldermen approved rezoning a controversial piece of land. Rob Macko joins us in the studio with a look at the pushback citizens are giving that city. Rob.
The Board of Aldermen approved the zoning change 2 weeks ago, 4-3. Neighbors had presented 2 petitions against the rezoning, but city leaders say they weren't valid. Some of the neighbors complained about that at tonight's meeting. Now, if the petitions did count, it would have required a supermajority to approve the rezoning. The land at Weaver Road and State Highway FF was zoned single-family residential. The aldermen rezoned 4 acres to general commercial and 13 acres to multi-family residential. Developers want to build a grocery store and an apartment complex with around 150 apartments. Opponents are concerned about their property values and more traffic. The property is also next to Wilsons Creek Intermediate School. Neighbors say they plan to appeal the aldermen's decision.
It all boils down to the fact that nobody moved to the city of Battlefield to have apartments in their backyard. Most people are just fine with the commercial portion of it, the rezoning. Most people that I've spoken with are fine with that.
Battlefield struggles with retail development. This is a win for us if we can potentially partner with a developer to do a retail side with some multifamily. Southwest Missouri is one of the fastest growing areas in the state.
City leaders say no one reached out to City Hall to ask how to properly fill out the petitions. Residents say the city's petition form is vague. The city says the apartments would be market rate and target young professionals. Live in the studio, Rob Macko, KY3 News.